Welcome to another deep dive. Today, we're going way out there, asking the question, how would we even begin to communicate with extraterrestrial intelligence? I mean, it's a big one. And you've given me a really fascinating stack of research to look at. Excerpts from this book, Archaeology, Anthropology, and Interstellar Communication, even some NASA documents, and a whole bunch of SETI research papers.
Yeah, it's like we're putting together a toolkit for talking to aliens using what we know about archaeology, anthropology, and of course all the latest in SETI research.
I love that. Okay, so before we go building that spaceship, though, maybe we should learn from some, I don't know what to call them, some earthbound explorers, right? Because all this research keeps talking about ancient civilizations and how hard it was to understand their languages.
You're right. It's a really good parallel. I mean, think about it. For centuries, nobody could understand ancient Greek or Mayan hieroglyphs. They were just these mysterious symbols. It wasn't until we cracked those codes that we could begin to understand those cultures,
Yeah.
right?
So you're saying trying to understand a message from ET is going to be like looking at the Rosetta Stone all over again,
Yeah.
except without the handy Greek translation this time.
Yeah, sort of. But you know what? The Rosetta Stone actually shows us some of the traps we need to avoid. Scholars studying Egyptian hieroglyphs and Mayan writing, they both fell for something called the ideographic myth.
The what now?
The ideographic myth. They thought the symbols represented ideas directly, like bypassing any spoken language, and it set them back decades.
So we can't assume aliens will think like us
Nope.
or use language the same way we do.
Right.
I mean, even if we both get math, their equations might be written in ways we can't even imagine.
That's exactly it. Imagine explaining, I don't know, calculus to someone who'd never seen Arabic numerals or a graph. Our system of symbols, it could be completely alien to them.
Okay, my brain is doing loop-the-loops right now. But what about culture? These sources also talk about how hard it is to understand human cultures that are different from our own. So how are we going to bridge that gap with beings from another planet?
Ah, yeah, the culture conundrum. Even defining what culture is has been a big debate in anthropology.
Wait, really? I thought culture was pretty straightforward, you know, food, music, holidays, all that.
Sure, that's part of it. But it goes way deeper. Early anthropologists thought of culture as a set of rules that defined a group. But that kind of thinking leads to oversimplification and even stereotypes.
So if culture isn't just a list of traits, then what is it?
Okay, imagine culture is a process that's always changing. It's like a lens that we use to see the world and interact with each other. It shapes how we understand everything: time, space, social roles, even, I don't know, like the meaning of life. And that's just humans we're talking about.
So you're saying communicating with aliens is less about cracking a code and more about understanding a whole different way of experiencing reality.
Exactly. And that's both exciting and a little scary, right? It means we might meet beings whose values, beliefs, their whole idea of intelligence could be totally different from ours.
Whoa, this is heavy stuff. So where do we even start? The Drake equation keeps popping up, but isn't that just a bunch of guesses about intelligent life out there?
It's a cool tool, but yeah, it's more about what we don't know. It lays out the things that determine whether a civilization could even develop the tech to communicate across the stars, and whether they'd even want to.
But there are still huge gaps in what we know about those factors, right? Like star formation, okay, we kind of get that. But how many of those stars have planets that could have life? That seems super speculative.
Yeah, and even if there is intelligent life on those planets, who's to say they develop technology? Or that they'd want to chat with us? Maybe they're happy just watching from afar, or maybe they've had bad run-ins with other civilizations before.
Okay, hold up. Bad run-ins. Now you're making me think about those sci-fi movies where the aliens are definitely not friendly.
Huh. Science fiction is fun to think about the possibilities, but we're talking about a vast unknown. We can't let fear or fantasy, lead the way here.
Okay, so how do we approach SETI with curiosity, but, with some healthy caution too?
That's where anthropology is so helpful. By studying human societies and how they've interacted throughout history, we can start to get a sense of how technology develops, how culture affects communication, and what might make a civilization reach out or stay silent.
Okay, I'm seeing the connections here. So let's talk about those human interactions, because the research you gave me also mentioned some fascinating case studies of cultures clashing right here on Earth. Like, what can we learn from those encounters?
Right. History gives us a reality check about how contact between different cultures can go down. It can be anything from tragic to totally transformative. A good example, that the Spanish conquest of the Aztecs, it shows what can happen when cultural misunderstandings and power imbalances collide.
Yeah, definitely not something we want to repeat on a galactic scale.
Surely not all cultural encounters are that bad, right? Oh, absolutely not. Think about Japan's modernization when they encountered the West. It shows that a civilization can adapt and evolve when they need to engage with a wider world, you know?
So contact can be a catalyst for progress, but it's definitely a two-sided coin.
Exactly. And that's why understanding culture is so important for SETI research. We can't just assume any contact will be peaceful or good for us. We need to be ready for, well, anything, really.
Okay, I'm getting the picture. But before we go too far down that road, let's bring it back to the here and now, because the research is pretty upfront about the challenges facing SETI today.
Yeah, you're right. There are hurdles everywhere you look. Our tech, even with amazing things like the Allen Telescope Array and projects like SETI at Home, it can only do so much. We're still limited by how incredibly vast space is and how faint those signals are that we're trying to hear.
And then there's funding.
Mhm.
A lot of SETI relies on private money, which can be, well, unreliable, makes it tough to plan long term.
You got it. And then there's the ethical debate about actively sending messages out into space. Some researchers say it's reckless and dangerous, while others say it's the only way to actually find someone out there.
So it feels like we're at this crossroads. We have this huge desire to connect with other intelligent life, but we're also up against the limits of our technology, uncertain funding, and the ethical questions of what we're doing.
For sure. It's complex. But despite all of that, the payoff could be enormous. Imagine expanding our understanding of the universe, of life itself, in ways we can't even grasp right now.
I mean, what if we could study an alien signal? Figure out their math and physics, their biology. It would revolutionize how we understand reality. And, on a deeper level, knowing we're not alone could change how we see ourselves and our place in the cosmos.
You got it. It reminds us that even with all the uncertainty, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence gives us this huge opportunity to discover new worlds. A&D, rediscover our own.
Okay, you've got me hooked.
Oh, what?
But with so much to unpack, where do we go from here?
Well, now that we've laid the groundwork, I think it's time to dive into some real-life cultural encounters right here on Earth. History is full of stories that can help us understand how complex communication is, the potential for both cooperation and conflict, and how contact can transform entire civilizations. You ready for a trip through time?
Let's do it. Okay, so you were saying that history is full of examples of these cultural encounters that can teach us about communication. The real messy stuff. I'm ready for some case studies. What have you got?
Well, let's start with a civilization that's a bit closer to home, time-wise, I mean, the Romans. The research actually uses them as a case study for how a powerful culture can, on the one hand, absorb, but on the other hand, be changed by the people it conquers.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
I usually think of the Romans as this unstoppable force that just flattened everyone. How did they end up being influenced by the people they conquered?
Well, think about it. The Roman Empire, it was huge. From Britain all the way to North Africa, so many languages, religions, customs, you name it. To actually rule all that, the Romans had to get good at adapting. They brought local gods into their own pantheon, used architectural styles they saw, even, integrated military tactics from the people they fought.
So instead of just forcing their own culture on everyone, they were, smart enough to borrow and adapt. That's a much more complex way of thinking about conquest than I'm used to.
It is, and it's really important for SETI, that idea. We can't just assume a more advanced civilization will always dominate a less advanced one. It's too simple. Contact could mean this crazy exchange of ideas, tech, where both sides end up changing in ways nobody expected.
Okay, I'm seeing how these historical examples can help us think about SETI differently. What other case studies did you find?
The research talks a lot about the Polynesian voyages, across the Pacific. They're a perfect example of human ingenuity and adaptability. These weren't just random trips. The Polynesians were incredible navigators. I mean, they used the stars, the ocean currents, even bird flight patterns, all to sail thousands of miles on the open ocean.
I could barely get out of a parking lot without GPS. But how does this connect to talking to aliens?
It shows us the power of observation, of truly understanding the natural world. The Polynesians, they didn't have what WE think of as advanced technology, but they knew their environment inside and out. And that allowed them to achieve these incredible feats of exploration, even colonization. Who's to say an alien civilization hasn't developed similar skills, maybe even surpassing our understanding of the universe?
Okay, I'm starting to see a pattern here. It's not just about gadgets and gizmos, it's about how a civilization interacts with its environment and how that shapes them, their development. What other historical examples did you bring?
Well, the Silk Road is another fascinating one. The Silk Road. It was this network of trade routes that connected East and West for centuries. Goods, ideas, inventions, all flowing back and forth across huge distances.
So, even without spaceships or fancy communication, humans have been doing a kind of first contact for ages, just on a smaller scale.
Yeah, exactly. The Silk Road shows us that contact doesn't have to be this big, dramatic, sudden thing. It can be a slower process of give and take, with knowledge and innovation spreading organically between cultures over time.
This makes me think about how much we could learn from indigenous cultures today. They have so much knowledge about plants, animals, whole ecosystems that we're just starting to rediscover.
Absolutely. And that knowledge has been built up over generations through observation and trial and error. It reminds us that technological progress, like having the latest gadget, isn't the only way to measure intelligence or success.
Okay, so we've gone from ancient Rome to the Silk Road to Polynesian voyages. A lot of ground covered. But what are the main takeaways here for someone like me who's trying to understand SETI?
I think the biggest one is this: we have to broaden how we think. We can't just assume that other civilizations will have the same ideas about technology, intelligence, even communication that we do. Who knows? They might have developed in ways we can't even fathom.
It's really striking me that contact doesn't have to be this explosive, Hollywood moment. It could be a gradual thing, unfolding over generations, even centuries.
And we need to remember this: just because a civilization has better tech doesn't make them better, period. There's so much we can learn from cultures that have different ways of interacting with the world, even if they haven't reached our level of, I don't know, technological sophistication.
Wow, you've given me a lot to think about. It feels like we've just scratched the surface of what history can teach us about communication between cultures. It's amazing.
And that's what makes it so exciting. The more we learn about our own past, the better prepared we'll be to face the future of SETI, all the unknowns.
Okay, so we know now that approaching SETI, it takes a broad historical view. We got to challenge our assumptions. That's key. But what about the actual nuts and bolts of finding and understanding those alien signals? The research you gave me, it talks about the challenges of that too.
It does, and this is where it gets really tricky. We're basically looking for a needle in a cosmic haystack, right? The universe is mind-bogglingly huge. Even with all our fancy tech, we can only listen to a tiny, tiny slice of the electromagnetic spectrum.
So even if there are civilizations out there sending signals, we might just be missing them entirely. Like we're not tuned to the right channel at the right time.
Exactly. Plus, there's the challenge of recognizing an alien signal when we see it. How do you tell a real artificial signal from something that's just, a natural phenomenon? It's like trying to hear someone whisper during a hurricane.
That reminds me of another thing from the research, the problem of intentionality.
Mm.
How do we know if a signal is meant for a U.S. specifically or if it's just, some alien tech leaking out into space accidentally?
Oh, that's a huge point. If we find a signal that's clearly aimed at Earth, that means someone out there knows we're here and wants to chat. But if it's just some random blip, well, it might not tell us much about who sent it.
So how do we figure that out? Is there a way to block out the noise and focus on the signals that seem, I don't know, deliberate?
SETI researchers are always coming up with new strategies. One idea is to look for signals with patterns, something complex, something that wouldn't just happen naturally.
So something is obviously not random static, but like it's got some kind of structure or meaning built into it.
Exactly. And some researchers are even focusing on signals that seem directed at our solar system specifically. The thinking is, if a civilization is advanced enough to send interstellar messages, they probably know where we are.
That makes sense. But even if we do find a signal that looks promising, how do we understand it? We've talked about alien languages and cultures being tough to grasp, but this seems even harder.
It would be an incredible challenge, no doubt. But the research points to some interesting ideas. Some linguists and mathematicians, they're working on universal grammars, mathematical frameworks, basically, that could help decipher alien communication, even if it's based on totally different rules than ours.
So it's like trying to create a Rosetta Stone for the whole universe.
In a way, yeah, it's a long shot, but even if it doesn't work right away, it might help us think about language and logic in new ways, maybe even change how we understand communication itself.
This is all so fascinating, but I have to admit, it's a little overwhelming too. The challenges are huge. So many things could go wrong. It's hard to imagine how we'll ever actually do this.
It's true, the odds aren't exactly in our favor. But at its core, searching for extraterrestrial intelligence is an act of faith, really. It's about believing in human ingenuity, believing in the possibility of connection across these vast distances, and, well, just believing that we're not alone in this massive, mysterious universe.
That's a beautiful way to put it. And it reminds me of something we discussed earlier, the impact of actually finding another intelligence, philosophical and cultural side of things. Even if we never crack their codes or fully understand their culture, just knowing they're out there could be transformative for humanity.
Couldn't agree more. It could make us rethink our whole place in the universe, confront our own biases and limitations, embrace a bigger view of what it means to be intelligent, to be alive.
It makes you wonder, what kind of world would we create if we knew for sure that other intelligent beings were out there, watching us, maybe even trying to say hello?
That's a question that deserves a deep dive all its own. But for now, I think we need to shift gears a bit and explore a slightly different but equally fascinating part of SETI, the ethics of it all.
Okay, ethics, I'm intrigued. Lead the way.
Okay.
Ethics,
Yeah.
I'm intrigued. Lead the way.
Right. We've been digging into the science and the history of SETI. But the ethical side of things, it's something we can't just ignore. I mean, think about it. If we do make contact with aliens, it won't just be a scientific discovery, it'll be a cultural encounter. A meeting of minds, potentially separated by, well, huge amounts of time and space, and a whole lot of understanding.
So where do the ethical problems, I guess, come in?
One of the biggest debates is about whether we should be actively sending messages out. Instead of just listening, it's called active SETI. And it brings up all these questions about, well, who gets to speak for Earth? What should we even say? And do we even have the right to put our planet out there, expose it to potential risks we don't even know about?
That makes sense. It's like before you yell hello into a dark forest, you might want to listen for a bit. Right? Make sure there aren't any, I don't know, scary creatures hiding in there.
Huh, exactly. Some researchers, they worry that broadcasting our location could attract the wrong kind of attention, you know, put humanity in danger. But then others, they say, look, any civilization advanced enough to be a threat, they probably already know we're here. Our radio signals have been leaking out for decades.
Yeah, that's true. It's a tough one. Part of me loves the idea of reaching out, letting the universe know we exist. But then there's that other part that's a little nervous about the what ifs.
I get it. And that's the dilemma. We're in uncharted territory, no map, no guarantees. We gotta weigh the potential good of contact against the potential bad. And all while knowing we just don't have all the information.
So is there any kind of agreement on the ethical way to do this? Or are we just making it up as we go along?
Well, the SETI community, they're talking about it, trying to come up with guidelines for doing SETI research responsibly. Some people say we should hit pause on active SETI until we know more about the risks. Others say, okay, maybe we can be more careful, target specific nearby star systems instead of just blasting our signal everywhere.
It sounds like finding that middle ground between wanting to explore and protecting ourselves, and future generations. It's going to be a big part of SETI going forward.
It totally is. And it's not just about physical safety either. We have to think about the cultural impact too. Imagine, what if we got a message from aliens who are way more advanced than us? I mean, it could rock our world, literally. It could challenge everything we think we know about our place in the universe, our values, our beliefs, even what it means to be human.
Whoa, okay, that's a lot to process.
Yeah.
It's like we think of ourselves as the top of the intelligence chain, but what if we're just beginners?
Right. It's humbling, but it's also an opportunity to see ourselves and our planet with fresh eyes. And who knows, maybe contact with a truly alien intelligence could even help us solve some of our own problems here on Earth, like climate change, poverty, war even.
Wow, now would be an amazing outcome. But we can't just assume, right? There's no guarantee that any aliens we meet will be friendly or that they'll have all the answers.
You're absolutely right. But even if contact doesn't bring about world peace or some sci-fi utopia, it'll still be huge. Maybe the biggest thing that's ever happened to humanity. It'll force us to answer some really big questions, like who are we? Where do we come from? And are we truly alone?
It's hitting me now that searching for extraterrestrial intelligence isn't just about science or fancy technology. It's about all of us, our deepest hopes, our fears, our desire to connect, our fear of the unknown. It's about understanding ourselves and where we fit in the grand scheme of things.
I couldn't have said it better myself. And that's why this search matters so much, even if we never get that definitive answer. Just the act of searching, of asking these huge questions, well, that's what makes us human. It's what pushes us to explore, to learn, to keep growing.
So where does SETI go from here? What can we expect in the, I don't know, the years and decades to come?
On the tech side, we're going to keep getting better at finding and understanding those signals. New telescopes, more
Yes.
powerful computers, algorithms that can do things we can't even imagine right now. And on the ethical side, the conversation about doing SETI responsibly, well, that's only going to get more important as our abilities grow.
So it feels like we're standing on the edge of a whole new age of exploration, with both amazing possibilities and a whole lot of responsibility.
Absolutely. And having these conversations, thoughtful, informed discussions about what SETI means, scientifically, culturally, ethically, all of it. That's how we're going to navigate this new frontier. Thoughtfully and wisely, I hope.
Well, I have to say, you've definitely given us a lot to think about today. Thank you so much for taking us on this incredible deep dive into the world of SETI.
The pleasure was all mine. And remember, this search, it belongs to all of us. So keep looking up, keep asking those questions, and never, ever stop wondering what might be out there.
And to our listener, we hope you've enjoyed this deep dive as much as we have. We've covered a lot of ground, from the history of how cultures meet and interact, to the mind-blowing challenges of finding and decoding alien signals, and the ethical questions that we have to face head-on as we venture further into the unknown. But more than anything, we hope we've sparked your curiosity, inspired you to keep exploring these questions, because the universe, it's full of wonder, and this search, it's just the beginning.